Welcome everyone to our special presentation today. We have Chuck Brickley here and a wonderful poet and a member of our group. And I'm going to give you a little bio on him. So Chuck Brickley began writing haiku in the 1960s, saw his first haiku published in the 1970s, and in the 1980s was associate editor of Modern Haiku under the editorship of the legendary Bob Spees. He is currently a member of the Haiku Poets of Northern California, the Yuki Tiki Haiku Society, Haiku Canada, and the Haiku Society of America, for which he serves as the second vice president and contest coordinator. His multi-award winning collection of haiku, Earthshine, is available at chuckbrickley.com. And here's Chuck.
Thank you, Gary, for that, and thank you, Sue. And thank you to the HPNC Executive Committee for inviting me to do this today. But most of all, thank all of you for being here, because I may be doing a lot of yakking, but as you'll see shortly, this will be mostly about you. So again, many thanks for being here. I wanted to mention at the end of this presentation, we have a surprise. A reading of a brand spanking new work by two special guests. So be sure to stick around until the end. Okay, so now I'll get this set up. The screen sharing. See if an old musician can figure this out. Is that working? All right. Why haiku? Why haiku? And why haiku? Over the years, people have asked me, why do you write haiku? Why not regular modern poetry like you see in the New Yorker? Others, noting that I like to tell stories, have wondered why I don't write fiction or screenplays. Those are about the only questions I get outside of our little platform of English language haiku poets. Within our platform, that's another story. So many more questions and comments, and sometimes not uncritical. As I've noted elsewhere, there are almost as many approaches to writing English language haiku as there are English language haiku poets. Sometimes the questions and comments we receive from others, even critical ones, can be helpful. If we consider them with an open mind, we can learn, and in turn, our poetry can evolve. Some comments, however, can be confusing and counterproductive, even hurtful. In the end, there's only one person who can genuinely respond to such comments, to any comments, and that's you. So that's what my presentation is going to be about today. It's focused on what this whole haiku thing is about to each of you. The more in touch you are with why you write and why you write haiku, the easier it is to put all of these different approaches to our favorite platform in perspective, in your perspective. The following is a list of fundamental questions English language haiku poets may ask themselves. There are no uniformly right or wrong answers, only a range of bespoke responses. I love that word bespoke. Our friends across the pond use it all the time. It means custom made, just for you. Now, obviously, a lot of these questions reflect my concerns. By no means do they comprise an exhaustive list. It's a short list, only 9 questions. And even though it's short, we're not going to get to all of them today, probably. At the end of this today, I'm going to post on my website a synopsis of all these questions. All 9 questions will be on my website if you want to review them. Okay, so let's look at the first question. Why do I write? Why do I write? This is a question to ask yourself. Not why do I write haiku, or even why do I write poetry? Simply, why do I write? I believe every now and then a serious artist will stop and ask themselves, why am I doing this? Why? What are the sources of my need to create? So this is where our session today becomes interactive. If you have an observation you'd like to share, simply click on the raise hand and Sue will work her magic. Why do I write? Why do I personally write?
Carol?
Carol, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thanks. I had two answers come at the same time, so I'll say both of them. One is for expression, and the second one is to keep a record.
Oh, that's interesting. So a journal and to express yourself. That sounds good. Anybody else?
Sandra?
Yeah. Hi, Chuck. Glad to be here
Hi, Sandy. It's great to see you here today.
too. I think the two reasons that were already mentioned by Carol, but also a big one for me is to explore ideas and figure out what I think about things and answer the big questions. You know, it happens in the midst of writing for me sometimes.
I like that too, the using it as a source of exploration and a source of expansion, expanding yourself basically, because when you're exploring, you discover new things. And that's really cool. And when I said I'm happy to see Sandy, I'm happy to see everybody here. I just haven't seen her in a long time. Wow. Okay.
Gary?
Yeah, so I would say, at least for me, it seems to be part of my DNA. I mean, that is, I seem to be driven to write. I have to do it. I mean, like, I know many of my friends, you know, in the middle of the night, I can't go to sleep because there's a poem going through my mind. And I got to write it down. I'm driven to write it down. And I would say, secondly, it kind of goes along with my main art form, which is photography. I'm a very visual person. And so haiku fits nicely with my way of just sort of seeing the world and seeing my environment. And they kind of complement each other. And maybe sometimes there's a contrast between them, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, so you touched a bit on why you write haiku and its relationship to photography. But you started off with, you know, sort of touching on why you write. Why, and there is that answer. A lot of people say, artists I've known in my lifetime say, I write because I have to. And I know I used to always say, it's like a trick shoulder. I just, you know, I'm sorry, I just can't help myself. I got to write a song, I got to write a poem, that's just who I am.
Helen?
Yeah, it may be just rephrasing somewhat what some others have said, but I find that it helps to give shape to my thoughts when I write it down.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
A visual shape as well as some sort of I don't know, a coming together of ideas perhaps too in the process of writing.
I relate to that. For me, it's very much an oral shape as well. It's the sounds of the words I'm just surrounded by those kind of shapes all the time. Yeah, I can relate to that.
And Patricia?
Well, to build on that idea of giving shape to the thought, it helps to clarify my thinking once it's on the page. the page is very powerful in that respect. And the other thing I would say, I write as a form of appreciation for my life and the world and the people around me. It's an important way of expressing my gratitude.
Oh, I love that latter bit. That's really wonderful. It's almost like is art as prayer, or art as confirmation
Yes.
of our mutual existence, our shared existence. I love that. Thank you.
Scott?
I'm with Patricia on the appreciation. I'd serve it up. In my case, what I was going to say is that if I some folks have talking about clarifying their thinking, but for me, it's more a feeling thing. If I experience a feeling, a twinge of something, I want to share that, and in the process of sharing it in writing, I sort of better understand that feeling. For me, it's a little bit of a discovery thing where I'll find that I'm moved by something. I'm not exactly sure why. And so I almost use it as a mode of inquiry. And but the sharing thing is really important. I remember early on, when I read Bill Higginson's Haiku Handbook, he makes a big deal out of sharing. And at the time I thought, oh, geez, this this is kumbaya. It's kind of silly, but actually I've come to really embrace that over time, and that to me is a central aspect of it. But definitely the gratitude thing.
Wonderful.
And Evan?
Yeah, I identify with much of what other people have said, but I'll add that part of me feels obligated to just try, as such a grateful consumer of so many other people's writings, that that only ever comes about from individuals sitting down and trying to create something. So I feel like, I guess it can be called like a social obligation to just try.
That's so interesting. I've never heard that before. That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah, cool.
Michelle?
Yes, I agree about the part, the gratitude, and it just seems to me that sometimes you see things that are so beautiful and you'd really like to share it and savor the moment and be able to look at the poem later and have that beautiful image come back to you. And so that's what I think about a lot when I write, is sometimes things are so beautiful, I just want to keep hold of them as long as I can.
I feel the same way, and I think when I started out writing when I was a teenager, or actually no, when I was in like grade 1 or 2, I was creating a sense of order. I was always making paintings of hillsides balanced by an ocean between them, and with the sun rising, and just something beautiful. My family personal life was so screwed up that I needed to have some sense of order somewhere. And but I evolved beyond that, but still, I can't get over a sense of beauty. It's one of my primal reasons for why I'm drawn to haiku, and I really share that with you, Michelle. Thanks for bringing that up.
And John Stevenson?
Well, for me, it's all of what's been said so far, but there's one thing I haven't heard yet. Some years ago, I was invited to an elementary school to talk to the students about why I write. And what I said to them is, I've been writing all my life, but I thought, and I've had different reasons at different times in my life, but I thought that you might be most interested in why I was writing when I was your age. I said, did you ever notice that grown-ups have more power than you? that grown-ups decide what you should eat and what you should wear and what you should read and what you should learn and so on. Well, there's good reasons for that. I'm not telling you that that's a problem, but what I am telling you is that every one of those decisions and many more beside that will be yours to make someday. And it's not too soon to practice having power. When you write, you create a miniature world in which you decide what's in that world and what's not in that world, where you decide what's important and what's not important, where you decide what words mean. You don't have to take that other people's word for it. So when I was very young, I started writing to practice having and using power.
Wow, that's just so cool, everything you said there, and I can really relate to it. And of course, it changes the reasons why we write change over the course of our lives. But what I really especially liked about what you just said was how you were teaching these kids to own their writing and to that sense of power that they can get writing. And that reminds me of I was talking with my grandkids recently about how they have it's something they don't learn in school. They never teach you in school, is that you have the power to create yourselves.
Let me just say, Chuck, I'm about to, next Saturday, I will be going to the United Nations International School to take part in the award ceremony for the student haiku contest that I've been judging for the last 17 years. And when I select those works from first graders through high school, what I try to do is I try to meet them in the middle with recognizing their power.
So very, very cool. Very, very cool.
Interesting. John Thompson?
Hi. I think I try and I do a lot of things, but what I've written here is to more deeply connect with wonder while navigating between the man-made world or person-made world, I guess, and the natural world. So there's tension in the writing, and yet there's a release too that I really enjoy.
Ah, that's interesting. To bring, of course, if you had no tension, why would you write? Why would there be you seeking a resolution or a way of resolving the tension? That's what writing is. Interesting.
So place finding a little bit, Chuck, too, I guess is what it is. And kind of not unlike what John Stevenson was just saying, too, probably. But I'd never thought of it in terms of power, but now I can see that.
Power in naming things. That's
Power
pretty
in naming.
primordial.
Yeah.
Very primordial.
Diana?
Great conversation. Thank you. For me, it's about giving voice to the natural world that often doesn't have a voice. It may be beautiful, it may be difficult, but that's it for me. Thank you.
And you're a haiku poet.
I am.
Yes. I love it.
Thank you.
Jim?
Thanks. Why I write, I think, has changed over the decades that I have been writing. But as I come to understand why I write now, it's a way of valuing myself, valuing my inner world. To take those sense impressions, those thoughts and those feelings, and to let the synthesis burble up from that preconscious into something that other people can validate and appreciate, and sometimes make something that is beautiful, is really important to me. And the reason that it's important is because in my life, in my childhood, that inner world was devalued, and it was very painful. And so the ability to create a poem by interacting with the world and through my own experience is a way of validating myself that I didn't experience much early on. And so me, the writing is very much about that intrapsychic process that comes out in a tiny poem, a haiku or tanka.
There's a lot to chew on in that. That's so cool, so interesting. Thank you, Jim.
Carolyn?
Okay, am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. So I want to reiterate what Carol started out with, that I write as a diary. I mean, everything I have ever written, I can look back and say, oh, I remember where I was, why I wrote it, you know, what the impetus was for writing that particular haiku or longer piece, whatever it is. So it really is a journal for me, which I love. But I think the real reason that I write is I just love stringing words together. I love the music, you know, that you can create by stringing words together, music or the dissonance, you know, consonance or dissonance, whatever it is. And I actually happen to really love editing. I started out editing long pieces, and I have edited journals, but I also get to edit my own writing, whether it's long or haiku. And I enjoy that so much. So I think that it is this actual, as I said, just stringing words together just gives me so much pleasure if I can do it in a way that finally feels right. I might have to struggle and write the poem over 17 times, but when I get it right, I really love it.
Oh, wow, Carolyn, you touched on three things there. As journal, I write for that reason too. I relate to that. Everything I write is a journal piece. And the joy of writing, just for the sheer joy of it, I think all writers have that. It's analogous to me I think of a figure skater. While we're watching a figure skater do a figure eight or some fancy pattern, the only way you can get good at that is if you just love the sheer joy of balancing yourself on a blade on ice for hours and hours at a time. If you don't love doing that, you'll never be a good figure skater. So I really relate to that, Carolyn. And then the third thing you brought up at the end there is nailing it. I think any craft in life is you can't get good at it unless you thrive on that joy of nailing it. Wonderful. Thank you.
Christine?
Thank you. And all of everything that's been said is just an eye opener, of course, but my main response to my need to write seems to be to poke the world. I want to, I wrote years as a closet poet. And then I realized this is not entirely satisfactory for me anymore. And I kind of, came out and began to publish. And but the elements are the ability to poke some other person, a reader or someone out there, to say, what do you think? Get back to me. I wanted to make contact, so to speak, after the years of not publishing or sharing, and keeping it all as always a work in progress. I am definitely what my friends call a wordsmith. I love words and I love to play with them and work with them. And as Carolyn said, there is that wonderful thing that happens when you get it right. But basically, the big source, I think, for me is just wanting to throw something out there in the world and say, hey, anybody listening? Thanks.
Oh. Thank you, Christine. That's interesting. Yeah, is anybody listening out there? It's existential. I really am taken by what you mentioned about being a closet writer, but now discovering what it's like throwing your work out there and sharing it with other people. I think of the many musicians I know who play by themselves at home all the time and don't play with other musicians. And then when they finally do, it's another whole world. It turns out when you play up by yourself, you don't have a real true sense of rhythm. If you have come to a passage that's kind of tricky, you kind of slow down the tempo so you can maneuver all the notes. But if you're playing with other people, I'm sorry, you don't have time to do that. And so your game gets up quite a bit by mixing with other people, and I'm sure you have found that, Christine, since you've come out of the poetry closet.
Yes.
Very cool.
I'm going to call on myself because I have my hand raised too for a minute. I just wanted to say, not just haiku, but why write at all?
Yep.
I've gone through different periods in my life when I've been actively writing and when I haven't been, like in particular, when I was in law school, there's no creative writing at all that I was doing. And when I finally got back to creative writing, I actually took a class here in Walnut Creek when my kids were tiny, and it was writing in the garden. And it was once a week. And I can remember leaving that first session, driving home. It was like my body was tingling. I was alive again. And it was that feeling of finally like paying sharp attention to the world around me, to my inner world, to everything. And then also just that joy, the pure joy of creating a thing. I think a poem is a thing. It's sort of like knitting a sweater, you're creating a made object. And there's such joy in that. And then also just connecting with people who are in the same pursuit. The people who are also paying attention, who are also striving to make a beautiful thing. I feel like even if I never make the most beautiful poem I'm striving for, there's such joy in the chase, just the endeavor, and I love to be among people who are also involved in that same chase. I think we experience the world, in a different, more full way. That's what I wanted to say. Rita?
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, there is such a richness in writing. Has always been my choice. I was not even 5 when I learned to write before learning to read. And then I continued to write, and I was a teenager, and I had a pen pal in Paris, and I would write letters in in French and in Italian every day, and then of course I started writing in about the meaning of life and consciousness and mindful living, and then photography, like Gary was saying, photography also became my passion, and it was about both the writing and the photography. It was a way to capture the beauty and the meaning, the essence of a moment in time. And beauty, I've always had, I have to have beauty in order to function. If I don't have beauty around me, or seeing beauty even in something that most people would find ugly, like my story of the burned rice, yeah, I cannot, I will create it. I will create, that beauty then to capture both in words and into photos. My haiku writing has come really late in time, in the last few years of my life, but it's such a passion that, like Gary was saying, that wakes me up at night, and I had to turn the light and put down, the words that came through whatever, a dream, a vision, and just they wanted to be written, some way to have a record of that moment, that meaning, so it's a spiritual journey for me. It's the essence of life and to be expressed.
Lovely. Thank you, Rita. There's a couple things you touched on. I'll get to you in a second, John. There's a couple things, Rita, you touched on that that I think bears repeating. One is that the beauty can include the plain things, and maybe what somebody else might consider ugly or even terrible. There's a beauty in everything in life. Existence is an amazingly beautiful, terrible thing, and you opened up a lot of doors in that conversation, and you also were the first to bring up and using the word spiritual, although everybody else has touched on it in different ways. I'm happy to hear that word in our discussion today as well. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go again, but this is something else we haven't touched on, I don't think. I was speaking to a large group some years ago, and I asked everyone there to raise your hand if you use a computer, and keep it up and look around, and you'll see that's everybody. Okay. Now, second question. Raise your hand if you know how to make a computer, not assemble parts from a store, but make a computer from scratch. And it was a large group, so there were 1 or 2 hands that went up. And I said, this is a situation in which we live. All of us benefit from a technology for which a very small number of us are the custodians. Well, writers are the custodians of the oldest technology, or one of the oldest technologies that there is, and that is the spoken and written word. We always ask the question of what is this in our lives at some point or other? And if we want to ask basic questions like that, we have to get not to the latest technology, but back to the very beginnings of technology.
Well, that's really interesting, and it has some bearing on why you write and the power in why you write. We're custodians of language. Another profound contribution to our conversation today, John. Well, I think that's it. I don't see any other raised hands here. So I'm going to go to, wasn't that fun, gang?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go to my second question. Why do I write haiku? Now we come to this. Why do I write haiku? Why, out of all the gin joints in all the world, she walks into mine? Now, every time I start that sentence, I just want to say that. Why, out of all the genres of poetic expression in the English language, do I choose haiku as mine? Do I see a raised hand?
Scott.
I think Rita's is still up from before, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's Scott is at the top. now.
Okay. For me, it's my one time to be authentic. I mean, I see haiku as guileless, as opening myself up that, gee, look what I found. I want to share that. I mean, and hoping that other people might be similarly moved. But it's for me, it's perhaps the most authentic thing I feel I've done, and there's joy in that. I mean, it's a release, and and it's fun. I mean, I don't think we've heard the word fun. We've danced around it, people, but for me, it's pleasurable, and it's. I think Sue mentioned it's great to have the sense that if you open yourself up in this way and share something that you're really excited about, which maybe in our traditional way of thinking, we're programmed as thinking, oh, well, that's trivial, but it's not. And there's something wonderful in knowing that it will be received by at least a certain set of like-minded people as not trivial, and quite the opposite. It's authentic and it's special. I mean, so that to me, I think haiku is uniquely designed to do that, and it's a participatory sport. I also like the fact that you create something that is deliberately incomplete, and it really requires people on the receiving end to co-create and to make it their own. And I think that I like that as well, that it's an acknowledgement that as the poet, I'm not the final word. I'm just the opening salvo. And this is a conversation that we're having writ large. So I think that that's glorious. And I think that haiku does that better than any other form of poetry.
Wow, you covered a lot of bases there. I really enjoyed hearing, touching all those bases. It's a home run. Especially the guileless part was, it reminded me of the title of your book and the theme of your book, The Wonder Code. Thank you.
Diana?
Oh, yeah. That was just great, Scott. Thank you. It's a relief for me after writing long poetry for like 30 years and having, just the one breath poem and rattling it around in my head over and over. Being able to hold that now is a delight. And that's all. Thank you.
It's brevity. It's brevity. Yeah. Terrific. I think we all share that.
Yes.
Rita, is your hand?
Yes. Well, why I write haiku. The first poem that I wrote as a teenager, that was actually published last fall for me. I wrote it in Italian and translated in English. And so it was a 3-line poem, and very, very interesting. And so many years later, when I started embracing becoming a mindfulness practitioner and then teacher, trainer, I saw the haiku as the perfect expression of three levels of consciousness, the physical, the mental, heart and mind, together, thoughts and emotions, and the spiritual level. So I find myself that, 3 lines you can express the essence of those 3 dimensions, and in simplicity, at its essence, and in the moment. So that's why haiku.
Wonderful, Rita. Thank you for sharing all those reasons.
Thank you. Carol?
Okay, I thought I was muted, sorry. To me, haiku is just like a perfect little gem, and it can be read at any time, even years later. And I, or anyone reading it, if it's written well, can re-experience the original moment and feeling. I just love it.
I love that too. That's that crystallized moment that you can return to, like a pearl, like a diamond. Yes, beautiful.
Debbie?
Yeah, yeah. There's two thoughts that I have. The first is that I wrote, poetry my whole life from the time I could hold a pencil, but I didn't really start writing haiku until the late 1990s. And when I wrote the longer poems, it was more about creating something. I was creating, something. Maybe I read something and it triggered something, and then I kind of went off with that thought. But with haiku, it's about seeing my world through different eyes and appreciating the small moments that I might have just glossed over and not even noticed until I started writing haiku. I could be stuck in traffic on a freeway. In my pre-haiku days, I would just be, oh my God, I'm really late, the freeway, all this traffic, blah, blah, blah. But I might be sitting in the traffic on the freeway. I look up and I see migrating geese, and I go, oh, the geese are migrating too, like everybody migrating home from work. You know what I mean? And it kind of brought meaning to these moments of my life. And the second thing, it's kind of funny. I was on the same wavelength as Carol. I see haiku as like time travel. I've always been a kind of a, sci-fi poetry person, but I when I was at Gettysburg, I was walking along, and it was in the summer, and the grass was very high, and then that poem by Basho popped in my head about summer grasses, all the remains of a warrior's dreams, and I started crying. I was standing there in Gettysburg, and I was feeling that poem, so I felt like I was in time traveled back, so that Basho and I were the same person experiencing that same thing of being on a battlefield where people had died and soldiers had died. And you know what I mean? And my haiku's that way too. I have one about standing, white marble, I'm small at the steps of Lincoln, where every time I read that haiku, I remember how I felt looking at that statue the first time I saw it and how big it was, right? And so those are the two aspects of haiku. I just really love this idea of appreciating my world more and noticing things I would never notice before. And then this idea of revisiting it, like Carol said, that what I always call the time travel aspect of haiku. So, yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful, Debbie. Especially the way you made me feel what you were talking about, adding the emotional context, texture to your words. Wonderful. Good to see you, Debbie.
Yeah, great to see you.
Ellen?
Hi. Yeah, I think for me, I enjoy haiku because it's a distillation of the moment. It seems to distill things in a way that, nothing else can. And it gets really to the essence of the moment. And also somebody earlier mentioned the joy of editing. I also like editing things. And I think trying to get down to a haiku is the ultimate editing process. And so I enjoy it for that as well. So, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chuck.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Helen.
Jim?
Two brief responses to the question, why haiku? The first is that its brevity works for me because I obsess so much over each word. There were fewer words to obsess about in a haiku than in a longer poem. But the deeper answer is that the haiku begs an intuitive response, not an intellectual one that I think longer poetry does. It's not making a point. It's not It's not telling me what I should think or do or believe, but it is an open-ended, intuitive response, and that really suits my temperament and allows me a whole lot more room. So that's why haiku is and tanka is my preferred poetic expression.
Well, that's interesting what you said, both aspects. The latter, insofar as it's not only you're allowing room for in your expression, but you're allowing room for the reader too.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can also relate to your point about obsessing over every little word. That's one reason why I write maybe 1 or 2 haiban a year. It just takes me, I'm so exhausted after writing one. I don't even want to, I'm so happy to see the backside of it that the idea of writing another one doesn't occur to me until I've forgotten what it was like writing the last one.
It can be painful, huh?
Yes. All right.
Faye?
Yes, I was very fascinated to listen to everybody because, as you know, I grew up in Tokyo, so my learning haiku like Basho, Isa, or Shiki, or whoever was a part of my education, and I hated it so much because it's just boring for me, and I didn't imagine why people writing haiku, why people loving haiku. So that changed when I moved to San Francisco, and just listen to a haiku in English, and then I saw like, wow, that's a different things, and it's a very beautiful, powerful, and interesting because Joe mentioned about something like he talks about the power to elementary school student. I felt the power because I tried to write longer poetry, prose, everything in English when I came to here. But of course, in English, it's not my first language. So I was struggling. But then I thought like, oh, haiku, I kind of know what haiku is. So I have a power. And maybe I can, they use my Japaneseness to writing haiku. So that's the actually very interesting kind of like open my eyes to a new word. And also, unlike longer poetry or novel or everything, you don't have to say anything because here in America, you have to say everything. You have to express everything, to be understood. But then haiku, you can rely on the reader. Like, I want to say something, but I can hide between the lines, behind the words, below the word or something. So I think that's a reason why I write haiku. Thank you.
I really enjoyed hearing all that, Faye, and as everyone else did, I'm sure. And I'll be mentioning later about your Blue Willow Haiku World, all your translations that you've been doing for years of contemporary Japanese haiku. Yeah, thank you.
Juanito?
Hi, I tried to write old style haiku. I mean, old style poems back in college. And I remember it was too emotionally draining. So it was a relief when I discovered haiku and tanka, particularly haiku, because it was a different mindset. It allowed me to focus more on not on based on emotions, but partly, but not a lot of emotions as compared to the old style of poetry. A different mindset focused on nature, which was quite a relief for me. And it allowed me to be more focused with the present, and at the same time write about the past and the present, use the past too, as though it were the present, to write my poems and express them, be able to use those experiences into haiku or tanka.
I think you're one of the few people that have mentioned, several have actually, but nature is a big part, Juanito. Thank you for mentioning that. That is a big attraction for me, of course, to haiku, is nature and my relationship to it primarily, but also our culture's relationship to it, which has driven me more and more to send you over the years. But yeah, it's nature is a very big part of all this. Thank you so much.
Patricia?
I was going, I totally agree, the part about nature. In fact, I think that's one of the strongest draws for me to haiku, is the being taken out of myself and into nature in the process of writing haiku. I find that to be very important and healing process. The whole process is very meaningful to me. And the idea of not dwelling on myself, but on the world around me, and paying attention in that way to what's outside me, especially in the natural world.
Oh, I can so relate to that, so well expressed. Especially the word healing reached out to me. As a form of poetry, it offers this healing as a way of writing and as a way of reading, as a way of life. And our culture could use it too. One of the things that Scott has touched on in the Wonder Code and in some of his newer writings is this idea of healing as a culture. Western culture has gotten so far away, so cut off from nature in many ways, from corporate farming to the well-tempered system, which is slightly out of tune in music. Getting back in touch with nature is a big part of the reason why I write haiku. Thank you for bringing that up, Patricia.
Carolyn?
Yes, okay, well, I will start with nature because for me, it was kind of backwards. I mean, many people write haiku because they relate to the natural world. And when they see the things in the natural world, they tend to write about them in haiku. I was a city girl. I didn't know anything about nature. So when I started writing haiku and was introduced to haiku and started reading haiku, haiku taught me about all the flora and fauna I had never even seen before. It just, I mean, suddenly my bookshelves were filled with field guides to all kinds of things. And so it's been this wonderful eye-opening experience to discover that there is this amazing world of nature out there that I can use, I can employ it in my writing, but I also can just enjoy it. I can walk out there and say, you know, oh, that's a scarlet pimpernel. That just gives me a lot of pleasure. And the other reasons that I was going to talk about a little bit are very subjective and very pedestrian. But I mean, I wrote a lot of things before I got around to writing haiku. But when I started to write haiku, a couple of things happened. One was I started getting published much more than I was when I was writing longer things. And just, you know, just the act of being published sort of when I just first started writing, you know, practically right out of the box, that happened. And that was very encouraging. And when I was encouraged by that, it made me write more, it made me get published more. And the other really important part about haiku for me is the community. I mean, it has introduced me to a community that is so much smaller than the writing world of longer pieces, poetry, you know, creative fiction, creative nonfiction, blah, blah, blah. But it's, you know, I can come into a group like this and see all of these people that I know and like and can relate to. And that's what haiku has brought to me. So every time I think, oh, I can't write another haiku. This is it. I'm never writing another haiku. And then, you know, the next thing I know, I'm writing again because all of this draws me back. So that's it.
So wonderful. Two big points there is that haiku has brought nature to you and has brought fellowship to you. The two things that I can really relate to. And when you said earlier about all the nature out there, I know what you meant. But for me, literally, when the natural world out there, for me, literally, when I first started writing haiku, nature was out there. And then when I finally started to get it, it's like nature is in there. I'm the one out there. And haiku is a way of getting me in there. And I'm just having fun with words here, but I think you know what I mean. Thank you, Carolyn.
Christine?
Thank you. All the ideas are stunning here. But I have to say, the reason I write haiku is because of Jerry Ball. I was looking for a poetry class that at a place where he taught. And at the time I was doing a number of other things. I was still a performing tap dancer and we had rehearsals. I couldn't get to his class. And so he said, oh, well, I have this haiku group at Barnes and Noble. Why don't you come down? And it was all over in the first session or two. And that's the reason I write haiku. So gratitude.
Love it, the power of personal connections. I love it. And it's the way we inspire each other. Can never underestimate the power, again, that word John brought up, never underestimate the power that you have as a person, as a spiritual being, and as a poet. Great thing to remind us of, Christine. Thank you.
Evan?
Yeah, I think this is another way to say what Chuck said about getting into it rather than out into it, which is that writing haiku helps me practice a quality of awareness that I'd like to bring to my life generally. And also, as other people have said, it is just great fun, and it's a really portable poetry form, and it has great scope despite being such a short form. And as others have said as well, I just really enjoy the editing process and the satisfaction that comes from sculpting something to your liking and like polishing a piece off. And haiku is just so manageable that you could do that more often than I can with longer poems.
Thank you, Evan. I like that whole thing about the portable form that you can carry with you. I wrote a haibun years ago, published in Presence, and its title was "The Everywhere Easel." That's how I think of haiku. It's the everywhere easel.
Wakako?
Hi there. Hi. I also grew up in Japan, and then I loved haiku because part of it's math, 575. I just love them. The counting part, like, the counting the words, that's really, really fascinated me. And then I like the writing essays too. So in a way, like haiku was really, I enjoyed it very much. Came to the States, I was wondering, how can you write English in haiku with 575? And then that was really big questions for me. And then I joined the Southern California, haiku study group with Debbie. And then I said, oh, so this is English haiku. And then so that whole kind of a world opened up for me. And then like I write haiku now in English. It's part of it that brings me back the childhood love of writing. and then who I am as what I love, the nature, and then I was outdoor kid, so I definitely love the nature too. So the bring me back the love of what I used to be, what I liked. So in a way, my meditation time, that so noisy, everything's outside and busy, and then finally, okay, time for my haiku, and then so calms myself then. So that's the reason I write haiku.
Oh, that's so interesting. Interesting with the two cultures going on, and your obsession with counting, or your interest in counting, and come over here and not so much. And yet it's still a mindful practice. Evan brought that up too, basically. I forgot to mention that. It is, for a lot of us, it's a mindful practice. Is there one more person still, or is that a hand raised from before?
I think there are just hands raised from before. I think that's it.
How much time do we have, Sue?
No set amount.
Well, I mean, I don't want to bore everybody, so I think what I'll do is, in this next half hour, I'll kind of go more quickly through. I won't, I'll just kind of stop now and then and involve other people. Does that sound like a plan? So we can get through it. Okay. The third question, I think every haiku poet may ask themselves, not should, but could ask themselves, on what have I based my knowledge of haiku? I've written all these things around here you can see. Let's take a moment to look at some of these. Let's see, the top one there is modern. I can't see on my screen, but well, I can't see what's on my screen, so I'll just look at what I have on a sheet of paper over here, my cheat sheet. Traditional Japanese haiku in their original language. Well, we know of at least two of you here who that's a lot of your knowledge is based on that. Traditional Japanese haiku in translation with Western commentary. I think most of us can say that. Contemporary Japanese haiku in their original language. There's at least a few of us here can say that. Contemporary Japanese haiku in translation. Now, as I touched on earlier, Faye here has got thousands of excellent translations of contemporary Japanese haiku that she posts every day on Blue Willow Haiku World. Check it out online, Blue Willow Haiku World. Maybe Faye will put that on the chat line. And if you're not familiar with this, it's a good way to go about it. There are several books out there, many books out there that have that as well. English language, elementary school, 5x575 teachings. Most of us try to forget that. English language haiku found in edited books and or journals in print and or online. Many of us, most of us, I think, are there. Here's one. English language haiku on unfiltered, unedited online platforms. Some of these are good, some are helpful, some not so much. People post without any knowledge or experience, post what they think are haiku on these. And then others say, oh, wow, that's very good. And then bolstered by the positive feedback, they write more, and then so on and so on. But at least it has haiku out there. English language haiku how-to classes in person and or online. I'm involved in the HSA mentorship program, as are many of us here as teachers and students. And Brad Bennett, I know, teaches some classes online. I know many of you here, John, Scott, have taught many classes. And the one that I worry about is any one of the above solely. There are some of us that have only done one of these. Most of us have a mix of two or more, many more. And some of us, all of them, not me, but a few. And it raises the question, do I feel the need to learn more about traditional and or contemporary Japanese and or English language haiku? Let's spend a little time on that. First, we need Juanito and Wakako to unraise their hands, please and thank you.
Debbie?
I think that that's why when Jerry Ball, like Christine mentioned Jerry Ball, and he also started the Southern California Study Group. And that's why we call it a study group, because I see myself as sort of an eternal student of haiku. I think no matter how long you've written it, there's always something new to learn about haiku that you didn't know before, whether it's something in Japan or something you find a writer that you hadn't heard of, and then you start reading, looking and finding old journals with that work. I know when I went to Japan in 2019, I went to Matsuyama, and I was introduced to some haiku poets that I hadn't heard of before. And then, I started looking them up, when I got back. And so I think that, and every time I think I know about haiku, I learn something new, about Japanese haiku, or just a different way of looking at haiku. And so, yeah, I see myself as the eternal student. And I think that it strengthens your own haiku skills to, you may not like, some people like monoku, some people don't. I don't write very many of them, but I do enjoy them when they come out. So I think it sort of adds to your toolkit so that all your haiku doesn't sound the same, but yet still retains that essence of what is a haiku. And what is a haiku is sort of seems to evolve a little bit for me. It has the key aspects, but then Brad Bennett gave that, and Kristen gave that thing on Zoka. And I got really caught up in this idea of the creative energy of nature, or, however that is. So I think that, yeah, we all need to learn more.
Excellent, excellent. Teacher is student. And Janice talked a lot about and has written about Zoka, who's here today. And I learned so much at CBEC last year about Central and Latin American haiku poets. And Michael Dudley shared stuff about Croatian haiku. The haiku poets in translation that I read, that I heard there, just completely blew my mind. Some amazing work there. You touched on another thing that I'm going to very shortly here, is the whole notion of different forms of poetry, and I'll be getting there quite shortly. Thank you, Debbie.
Faye?
Sorry. I think, if you don't know anything about a haiku in English or Japanese or whatever, I think, you should start with some kind of a traditional nature haiku and maybe haiku handbook or something like that. But the danger when I started writing in 90s, early haiku or traditional haiku, it's just a focus on too much on the haiku moment, which is nice. But at the same time, haiku can be more broader, like broader culture experience or broader life experience or something like that. So I think after you learn basics, maybe, the try contemporary haiku. Like Debbie said, English haiku and Japanese haiku maybe too is evolving a lot too. And especially, I think, these days, of course, there are the very, very good poet in the United States, but like Chuck said, there's another very wonderful poets outside the United States, like Indian poets, the Kala mentioned about some, and some European poet like Croatian, the poets. So I think, we can learn from contemporary other countries' haiku poet as well. Thank you. And also, I'm not very fan of so-called monoku too, but I enjoyed reading it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye, and everyone be sure to check out her Blue Willow Haiku World.
Scott?
If I were to take the question on the screen literally, do I feel I need to learn more about? I'd say no, but if I changed one word, I'd say yes. Do I feel I want to learn more about? Simply because I'm curious. And for me, this is I suppose maybe it's a sandbox, so I'm more attuned to the fun of it. I don't see, for me, haiku isn't a thou shalt kind of realm. For me, it's a joyful playpen, and I'm curious about other approaches, and ultimately I probably write myself in a narrower bandwidth, but I find great pleasure in seeing what else is happening, because who knows, maybe at some point I can pick up something from there, or even apart from what use I can make, I can derive pleasure from it. And that for me is my first and principal joy with haiku, is reading. I love writing and composing and all of that, but for me the number one is the discovery that comes with reading haiku. And so I'm not inclined to create barriers. I like to kind of be sponge-like and take it all in, and I think maybe if only by osmosis, that has in some small way helped improve my own haiku writing.
Thank you, Scott, and I appreciate your semantic twist on need and want, and I understand it. And the whole thing about curiosity is we have this conversation in our household. My wife, one of the many things that amazes me about Kim is she is still, she's almost as old as I am. She knows that. She has a childlike wonder still and is curious about every little thing. And she'll read a new book and I'll say, I can't read that book. I will forget everything. She goes, so? But I really admire Kim's curiosity, and I have some too still. And but another thing you brought up there is, yes, I still have, and I think we all do or should be really interested in other haiku poets and what they write and new ways of looking at things. Once Raymond Roseleap wrote to me saying, the biggest compliment he could give me is this one poem of mine. He liked it so much he wished he could have written it. He said it sounded like something he could have written. And I wrote back to Raymond saying to Father Roseleap, the biggest compliment I can give another poet is that you wrote something that I never would dream of in a million years. And it moved me. And these are two of the functions of all art. One is to nail something that you've known and to nail it perfectly. And it's also to take you somewhere else that you've never been before. It's an exploratory process. So thank you for bringing all that up. I'm really appreciative of it, Scott. Okay, it looks like John's got his hand raised.
Yeah, just one little late entry. I feel like I'm involved in a really fascinating process that involves a slow process. At least it's been taking place the whole time I've been involved with haiku of continual discovery of aesthetics that are not native to my own, to my own culture. And what's happened to me is, I mean, I was blind and deaf to much of this beforehand, and it only gets revealed to me when somebody who kind of can cross those cultural boundaries makes it visible or something that I can hear. I think this is the process that's been going on for quite some time, and I don't see any end to it. I think we can expect it to continue, and I find it very exciting.
Very cool, John. And I remember your whole analogy, your extended conceit that you brought up with that old Zen parable with the elephant. That was very, very apropos to this subject matter. I'm going to, in the interest of time, so I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is probably the most interesting question, and I think I'll bring it up. Is any short verse a haiku? To date myself, I think this is a $64,000 question. Maybe these days it's the $1 million question on our little platform. Is any short verse a haiku? And I think you would seriously have to ask yourself, in my opinion, based on my knowledge to date, what characteristics of haiku differentiate it from other forms of poetry? I think if you're keeping up on what's published in haiku journals these days, you might think that this is the case. Any short verse can be a haiku poet, be a haiku poem. I don't know if we have time today. It's 1:45. I see a few hands raised, so let's take a limited number of responses to this.
Scott?
Yeah, I would say, in sort of using the language of logic, brevity is a necessary but not a sufficient condition to be a haiku. For me, there needs to be more, and probably the most important more component would be the fact that a haiku has these two parts that, or should have these two elements that rely upon the reader or listener to reconcile. I mean, that is where, in my estimation, the magic and power of haiku resides. And so if it's just an epithet or something that does not call for that degree and quality of reader or listener participation, then in my book it's not a haiku. But that's the both the challenge and pleasure of haiku in my estimation.
Thank you, Scott. There are many people who would say there have been great haiku written that do not have cuts in them, that aren't two parts. And there will be some great haiku where it's just one part, but it suggests the other part. It's tacit and left for the reader to determine. But yeah, I still get what you're saying. And it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Next, please.
Carol?
For me, I know not for everyone, for me, it's the just really importance of the kigo and how it gives such depth to the whole poem.
And that's terrific. And this is why I was talking about all this. And once you know why you write haiku, and you all know why you write haiku, but it's good to now and again get in touch with that. Because then if somebody comes along and says, well, haiku these days don't have to have kigo in it. And in fact, if you want to get with it, if you want to get published, then you better stop thinking about having kigo in your haiku. Then you can say, do a raspberry. I'm never good at raspberries, but you know why you write, and who cares what somebody else thinks? It's very important to know why you write. And if the Kigo is very important to you in your poetry, then so be it. And a Kigo or seasonality is very important in my poetry, my haiku. I know that. And
Me
it's
too.
one of the reasons I've enjoyed writing more senyu lately. It offers me some other alternatives. Okay, so anybody else? Okay, let's move on. I'm just going to go quickly through these if I can. And what's this next one here? Yes, haiku versus senyu. Well, this is an old question. I just touched on it. Do I consider there to be marked differences? Each of us has to decide on whether they think there are these distinctions, and it's based on your knowledge to date. Maybe down the road, your knowledge will come to the point where you might have different opinions about this. Seasonality in haiku. I think it's important that every haiku poet at some time deal with this subject. Not only Kigo and seasonality, but the traditional Saijiki? Or do you base it on what your original experience is where you live? Many of haiku poets I know do this. And what may be a season word in Japan, that particular animal, let's say, it might happen at a different time of the year here. So it's important for you to know this and to and decide for yourself about this. What is the next one here? What is the importance of Japanese aesthetics in my haiku? Which resonate with me? Do I study, assimilate, and use them in my haiku? Do I appreciate them in the works of Japanese and English language poets? This is very important to me, and it's how I originally got really excited about writing. I had been writing haiku, but after studying comparative religion and philosophy, my thinking, my worldview synced up with haiku aesthetics. And this was what really got me excited about it. What is the importance of English language poetics in my haiku? Do I study, assimilate, and use them in my work? Do I read poetry outside the haiku platform? I do, but I think many haiku poets out there don't. And there are many very successful and popular treatises out there that say haiku is not poetry. Erica Mann in Canada wrote a book called The Wordless Poem. I happen to think that haiku is poetry, and a lot of us do, but a lot of us don't. But if you do, it's very important to study English language poetics and assimilate them, I believe, but many people don't. This is why it's important to know what's important to you. Haiku form, we touched on this. If I don't write haiku in a strict 5-7-5 syllabic pattern, do I consider my work to be free verse? Well, I consider my work to be free verse haiku or organic verse haiku. Am I interested in trying my hand at any of the variant forms of haiku I've read over the years? Now, I've been doing it from day one. Actually, before I even knew what haiku was, I was writing concrete haiku. But it may interest you down the road as you study this, it may not. Okay, so that's it for my 9 questions. So I will have them on my website if you're interested. And I have a few final thoughts. This is a Chinese pictograph for the word sincere. It depicts a person standing by their word. Can you all picture this? On the left, that figure is a man or a person. and to the right is that person's word. And I find this really interesting, a man standing by their word, a person standing by their word. And it reminds me of the sincere is Latin for, the roots of those are Latin for without putty. And as for when the great masters in Rome and Greek, when they made their statues, their sculptures, if they made a mistake, they would sometimes, the lesser sculptors would add some putty or a similar product in there and smooth it off, but the masters didn't. Their work was sincere. So I just love this sincere, and I'll say this, this word power John brought up, I'm incorporating it here in what I'm saying. There's a power in knowing why we write and that what we write is in sync with our essential values. Such a power enriches the creative process. We can be more receptive to ideas and experiences on a daily basis, intuitively selecting which bear significance. We can ride waves of inspiration longer, and with practice, breathe life into our poems. Over time, we can edit our work with more assurance and better decide what's worthy of being shared. By being more in touch with what we do know, we can, for ourselves and our readers, touch upon the unknowable. To paraphrase Devo, it's a fun band that I loved from back in the 80s and 90s. To paraphrase Devo, are we not poets? That's everything I have for you. At the bottom, my last slide here. Thank you, fellow HPNC members, for being here today and making this wonderful. Synopsis of this, with all the questions and that final statement of mine, can be found for a limited time on my website, chuckbrickley.com. A little later today, I'll post it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna get out of here, stop share. And turn it back over to you. Yes.
That was very thought-provoking, Chuck.
Well, thank you, everybody.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So now, while we're still recording, I'd like to introduce our special secret guests. They're not really secret guests, but they have a secret surprise for everyone. A renge written for this occasion by the founder of Renge, Gary Gay, and his most frequent writing partner, John Thompson.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue.
John, do you want to take it away?
Yeah. So Gary and I are just going to read this Renge and make a few comments here. A lot of people mentioned fellowship in haiku, and Renge is a very good way to promote and help each other in writing haiku verse. Why Renge? Emerging from a nondescript succulent, dazzling flowers.
Without judgment, a desert rose blossoms.
Corner window with just the right sun, purr of a cat.
Line of ants, one carrying a dewdrop.
Wildflower and whale walk. The large she blooms.
The seven sisters with legs full of pollen return home.
So Gary and I have a lot of fun writing Renge. We've been doing it since he invented the form. And here Usually there's a theme. Here the theme is actually why Renge, and I just wanted to talk about really briefly some of the verses. The first one is why Renge. It's the surprise at looking at an ordinary plant and seeing the wonder in it. So many haiku I read, and some that I write have that in it too. Gary's second verse, to me, it shows beauty doesn't have a hidden agenda. It just is. Gary, would you agree with that?
Yes, John, I would.
Yeah. And it was also very nice of Gary because he originally wrote it as a desert rose blooms, but I used blooms in the 5th verse and he was kind enough to change it to blossoms. So there's some nice teamwork too there, and some compromising. A lot of times when we're writing, it's kind of interesting. Any subject you pick, there's a limited amount of words, and we don't like to repeat the words. So we kind of kid each other about taking all the words. The corner window is just the cats have a real ability to enjoy life. And I think a lot of haiku poets, especially Isa, shows us how to do that too. Gary, you want to talk about your line of ants? You had some really good comments on it when we talked.
Oh, I can't remember what we talked about, but it's just the fact that the insect is in the moment, which is sort of what a haiku is always in the moment.
Yeah, and it's such a simple poem, and yet if you think about the dewdrop on the ants, first of all, how did it get there? Is it doing it intentionally, or is it just dropped there? But water is the basis of all life here on Earth too. So there can be a lot of resonance, even though it's very simple. The next poem, the Wildflower and Whale poem, is just kind of funny, but there can be some resonance in humor too, I think. And then Gary finished it off very nicely with a poem of misdirection with the 7 sisters. You're looking in the sky, and suddenly you realize he's talking about bees, and making this really unusual connection that, you know, most readers will totally get, and yet probably wouldn't have seen it before. So anyways, the one other thing I wanted to mention is when we write the renges, we write a lot of haiku. Gary, a lot more than me. For example, in this poem, Gary wrote about 40 haiku, and I wrote about 10. So Gary now has 37 more haiku from writing this renge, and I have about 7 more to play with. And writing together can increase the quantity you write, and also increase the quality.
Yeah, and I want to also thank Chuck, because we wouldn't have wrote this without Chuck telling us about his topic. And, you know, renge is comprised of haiku. So it was inspired by Chuck's talk. So thank you, Chuck.
Oh, well, thank you. That was a wonder. I just love that poem and the talk afterwards. You guys write such good work together.
It's fun. We enjoy
Thank
it.
you. It's a lot of fun.
Have you published this thing, Chuck, anywhere? This why
No,
haiku?
I didn't publish it, but I first presented it at CBEC last October with and John was there. John Stevenson was there, and there might have been others here. I forget, but it went over so well. I was running around with a microphone, and it was a lot of fun. So when the executive committee asked me if I had any ideas for something to do this year with HPNC, I said, I don't have any new ideas, but I did this. What do you think? And you guys said, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Can I quickly add, this is Helen, that being fortunate to have Chuck as my mentor, he ran this workshop by those of us in his mentor group, I think the first time. And so I have experienced it on that occasion, I also experienced it at CBEC.
Yeah.
And so this is, in fact, the third time that I have heard this presentation. And I have to say that I have learned something new every time that I've experienced it. So, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mention your name there before, Helen. Of course you were there. It was wonderful you being there at CBEC. And yeah, it's a gestalt. It's a gestalt.
It's different every time.
It's different every time, depending on who's there.
Yeah.
Chuck, I feel like we're on the same wavelength here when it comes to workshops. My credo is like, the people should do the work, not me.
I also think it's something that evolves anyway, because, you know, just like any literary form, we grow and we see things differently and we try to do it differently. You know, when I first started out, nobody was doing the monoku thing. I mean, there was like one guy I think I knew, but so there's branches of this form as we grow and experiment with it, you know.
Now I have a book by Marlene Wills back here. Is full of monoku from the mid 70s. Yeah. This has been fun today, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chuck, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chuck. That's wonderful.
Thank
Really
you guys.
great.